They say wars are won with land, but the greatest financial victory of the 20th century was won neither on a battlefield nor at a peace table. It was won in a desert between two countries through an agreement the rest of the world was barely aware of. And this agreement became the invisible backbone of the global economy for decades. This system was called the petrodollar. The story of the petrodollar system is, in fact, a story of desperation. This system took shape in the midst of a crisis, at one of America's weakest moments, and transformed into one of the most ingenious financial maneuvers history has ever seen. After World War II, the world established a new financial order. Defined by the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, this order was simple. The dollar was tied to gold. 1 ounce of gold was exactly $35. All other currencies were pegged to the dollar. So the dollar went from being just a currency to becoming the world's reserve currency. It was a paper guarantee that replaced gold. This system worked wonderfully for a while. The U.S. had emerged from the war strong, held the world's largest gold reserves, and its economy was growing rapidly. But over time, a problem emerged. The U.S. began printing dollars non-stop. The cost of the Vietnam War, social spending, expanding budget deficits, all of it required printing money. The amount of dollars put into circulation far exceeded the U.S.'s gold reserves. It didn't take long for European countries to notice. French President Charles de Gaulle said it plainly. The Americans are printing paper money and buying real goods in return. And they began converting their dollars into gold. The U.S.'s gold reserves started to melt away. In 1971, President Nixon went on television on a Sunday evening and made a unilateral decision. The dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. This decision, which went down in history as the Nixon Shock, effectively collapsed the Bretton Woods system. The dollar was suddenly left without backing. It lost value. Markets were shaken. And the biggest question for the U.S. became, why would anyone hold dollars anymore? The petrodollar system was precisely the answer to that question. At this very point, two players step onto the stage. On one side, the U.S., holding the world's greatest military power, but with its financial system shaken. On the other side, Saudi Arabia, holding the world's largest oil reserves, but facing a security problem. The Iranian threat was growing, the region was unstable, and the royal family didn't feel safe. Both sides had needs, and those needs complemented each other perfectly. In 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon quietly traveled to Riyadh. The negotiations were conducted in secret. Nothing was announced to the public. But the deal taking shape at the table was crystal clear. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in dollars. In return, the U.S. was offering two things: military protection and weapons. U.S. military bases would be established on Saudi soil, and the royal family would be guaranteed protection against external threats. Furthermore, the Saudis would invest the dollars they earned from oil revenues into U.S. Treasury bonds. In other words, the Saudis would both lend money to the U.S. and help keep the dollar at the center of world trade. Shortly after, the other OPEC countries joined the system as well. And so the petrodollar order was established, and this system began to run like clockwork. Now let's take a step back and look at how cleverly this system was constructed. When the gold standard collapsed, the value of the dollar was being questioned. You could no longer answer the question, why should I accept this paper, with, because gold backs it. The petrodollar system gave a new answer to that question. Because you need this paper for every barrel of oil sold in the world. Without oil, the modern economy stops. Factories shut down, planes are grounded, trucks halt, heating systems go out. Oil is the lifeblood of the entire modern economy. And if every country must first buy dollars in order to purchase oil, and such a system had been established, then the dollar could continue to be the world's reserve currency even without gold. Think about it. Japan wants to buy oil. It first needs to give dollars to Saudi Arabia. Where does Japan find these dollars? by selling goods and services to the US. Germany too, China too, India too. Every country in the world is forced to accumulate dollars, because without dollars, there is no oil, and without oil, there is no economy. This system gave the US an enormous privilege called seigniorage. You print paper money and receive real goods and services in return. The very thing de Gaulle had criticized, but now, without the gold standard, on a much larger scale. Perhaps the cleverest part of the system was how the cycle closed. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries accumulated enormous amounts of dollars by selling oil. What were they going to do with all those dollars? If they brought them all back to their own countries, their economies couldn't bear it. Inflation would skyrocket. The solution was to invest them in US Treasury bonds. So this cycle was established. The US buys Saudi oil with dollars. The Saudis invest these dollars in US Treasury bonds. The US uses this money to finance its budget deficits. Then, this money flows back into the economy, and a portion of it cycles back to Saudi Arabia in the form of weapons and security. Economists called this petrodollar recycling. But to put it more plainly, the US was both determining the world's money and ensuring that this money flowed back to itself. And that's not all. A large portion of the petrodollars accumulated by the Gulf countries flowed to Wall Street. Saudi sovereign wealth funds, the Kuwait Investment Authority, the Abu Dhabi Fund. These invested in American banks, companies, and real estate. So the petrodollar system also laid the groundwork for Wall Street's consolidation as the global financial center. The event that ironically played a role in establishing the petrodollar system was, in fact, the 1973 oil embargo. During the Yom Kippur War, the U.S. supported Israel. Angered by this, the Arab OPEC countries declared an oil embargo against the U.S. Oil prices quadrupled, hours were spent in gas lines, and the American economy was shaken. This crisis actually showed the U.S. something very clearly. If you lose control over oil, you lose everything. The secret negotiations of 1974 came immediately after this crisis. So, paradoxically, instead of destroying the system, the embargo became the catalyst for the process that gave birth to it. The U.S. understood, you can't directly control the oil supply, but you can control which currency oil is sold in. This was a far more powerful lever. The shift from physical control to financial control, that was the essence of the petrodollar system. In recent years, serious challenges to the petrodollar system have begun. China is conducting negotiations with Saudi Arabia to purchase oil in yuan. Russia, China, India, and Brazil are seeking non-dollar trade arrangements. Saudi Arabia is attending BRICS meetings and, for the first time, considering alternative partnerships. When you put all of this together, you can see that the process known as de-dollarization has begun. Slow, uncertain, but real. So does this bring an end to the petrodollar system? Not yet. Because to dismantle the system, it's not enough to simply offer an alternative currency. You need to become the guarantor of Saudi Arabia's security, rebuild the global financial infrastructure, and uproot decades-long trust relationships. But the cracks have begun, and history shows us this. Systems don't collapse suddenly, they erode slowly. The gold standard didn't end overnight. The petrodollar system will most likely go through a similar process of erosion. The petrodollar story tells us this. Real financial power comes not from holding physical resources, but from determining the language those resources speak in. Now the question on everyone's mind is, who will build the next petrodollar system? And will we even notice? If you enjoyed this video and it added something to your knowledge, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like it. See you in another video.